So, anytime you do an interview, one of the things I want to kind of stress is one of the important things you should do is you should always do some prep work beforehand. Ideally, before you go to any interview, you should first of all you should know what you're going to write your story about, if at all possible. Like, suppose you say, "Hey, I'm going to do a story about an athlete." What are you going to write about the athlete? Is it just a story about the athlete? I mean, it's a little weird. I mean, there was there. I assume it's still on. Used to be a guy on CBS. I think it was like CBS Sunday Morning, like that a program, and he would just like take a dart and he would throw it at a board. I'm pretty sure it was CBS. And when it landed, he would go to that city, wherever it landed in the United States. He'd actually have his source throw the dart. It would hit the board. It would land somewhere, and it'd be like Springfield, Illinois. And so then he would go, okay. And so he'd go to Springfield, and he would grab the phone book, and he would turn. He'd be like page 87, and he turned the phone book to page 87. And he'd go, whoop, and he touched this. Sorry, he touched this page wherever. And what he would do is when he did that, he would then call that person, tell him who he was, and say, I want to do an interview with you. And then he would do it. Now, that's a pretty unusual way to do it. It's kind of a fun way. In that regard, it was more of a column. It was kind of like, let's see what this guy can find out. Maybe he'll find somebody a dud. But his theory was everybody has a story. And so he was going to go out and find that story in every person. And so sometimes you find some guy who's like, never left town. All I do is, whittle all day. And you're like, well, why do you whittle all day? And then it's like, well, I got a knife for my dad. Oh, tell me about your dad. And then he would get the story, right? By just doing that in-person interaction with that person. And that is a great way to get a story. You can get a good story that way. I'm not questioning that. But that's a fairly unusual thing. Most of the time when you're going to go out and do a story, I'm not really talking about news judgment, but you need a reason why you're talking to the person. Are they a really great athlete? Did they win some award? Are they about ready to graduate and they've had a phenomenal career? Did they break their leg and overcome something? I mean, what is this interview about? Why are we doing this? That right there will give you some leg up on how you're going to frame the questions, how you're going to do it. If it's hard news, maybe you've got questions that are going to be like, why are you stealing money? Why did you do this? Why are you a corrupt individual? You might have questions like that. I don't know. But you are able to then write questions. And I would always suggest you write questions beforehand and get those done beforehand. But the other thing is whenever you do something, if it's a profile, if it's a story about reform or whatever, one of the things I would always suggest is, talk to, a main source you might want to talk to second. You're better off to talk to maybe a few other people, get a little bit of a feedback and feeling about those people before you go talk to the main source. That way you kind of have some idea. Like if you're going to do a profile on an athlete, I would suggest you talk to 3 of the athlete's friends and 3 of their family members first, and then go talk to the athlete. Why? Because then you've kind of got people saying, oh yeah, he did this last year, he did that last year. And then you can go in and say, well, tell me about this or tell me about that. That helps you write the questions, getting that background, doing that background beforehand, asking other people what their thoughts are before you talk to the person. If you're doing a story about some city council issue, maybe before you talk to the mayor, you talk to a few of the people impacted by it. Maybe you talk to a few of the city officials who are going to have to execute the policy. Maybe you do some stuff like that. And then you go do your interview. So it sometimes works to talk to other people, find out what they're doing, and then you may want to go back. Sorry, I was looking at my notes to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Then what I would do is I would say always do your research. Now, if you worked for a newspaper or a magazine or anything else, they used to have a thing, and if you were to watch the movie Spotlight, there's some parts where they go down this library and they say, I need all the files on this, and this person brings up a cart with all these folders with all these old newspaper clippings in it. And that's actually what most newspapers, especially larger newspapers, used to have a library. And the library actually had librarians, and what the librarians did was before the computer age, what they would do is they would get a newspaper, and I should have a newspaper around here somewhere. They would come and they would get a newspaper, like here's a newspaper, and they would like come in and they would take and they would cut out every story and save it. But that's all nice and good that you have a copy of every story. But what happens is they would actually cut out and they would say art gallery displays best of student artists from the year. Okay. So we have art gallery, James S. Murray Gallery. Okay, so we know that's something that happened at the Murray Gallery, and so if somebody wanted to look up Murray Gallery in Google, they could Google it and this story would come up, right? Maybe they wouldn't care, but that might be something they would want. So, but back before that, what they would do is they would cut this out. They would then highlight or circle the word James S. Murray Gallery, and they would then take that copy and they would put it in a folder that would, or an envelope, for James S. Murray Gallery. And so anytime the word James S. Murray Gallery appeared in the paper, it would go in that folder. And then if you were ever doing a story about the gallery, you could go through and find everything that ever was mentioned, whether it be somebody displaying something, whether it be a robbery at it, whether it be a shooting, whatever it be. And then what would happen is, like, that same story, you might go down further and say, oh, well, here's the name of one of the people who had their art displayed, Diane Wilson. So you would circle her name, and you would then cut it out and put it in a folder labeled Diane Wilson. That way, if anybody ever had a story about Diane Wilson because something happened, they could then go back and find out, oh, back when she was a student, back in 2017, she won, or 2016 is the case, she won some award. And they would do that with every single story. Now, in some cases, they would have stories like honor society, like honor roll, and they would have like 350 names. They would literally take 350 copies of the paper, cut out 350 copies, circle the first name, do the next one, circle it, and they would then put it in a folder. And the benefit of that, the reason is because before you had the computer to search this, what would happen is maybe somebody would get shot and killed. Some kid would be involved in a shooting in, like in a park or something, and you would then go, okay, it was John Smith. Do we have anything on John Smith? And you go, oh, hey, here it is. He was valedictorian, and he was on honor roll 17 times, and he was, an Eagle Scout and all this. And that would be stuff you might work into your story. That would be questions you might ask for his parents. That may be questions you might go, oh, he was involved in Eagle Scouts at Smith Church, or, at First Methodist Church. Well, then you would call the Methodist Church and you would conduct, you would talk to them about it. Maybe you talk to the pastor there. Maybe you talk to the Boy Scout leader there. And that would all be allowed. And but what that room was called, where they did all those clips, was called the library. And sometimes they also call it the morgue. Morgue being the idea of, like, you have these drawers full of bodies. This is kind of just dead paper that you've cut it out and you've put it in folders, and so they would call it a morgue. And in smaller newspapers, every newspaper would have one. In a smaller newspaper, they would have just, have a librarian staff, and they would, you would just go in as a reporter and find it. In a bigger newspaper like the Boston Globe and everything, they would actually have a librarian, and a reporter would actually have to check it out, and the librarian would go and get the folders, then bring them to the desk, and they would, check back in and go, I never got this back, and I need to make sure we don't miss anything, because they would want to keep close record. Now we have computers, and every story gets fed through every computer. Every story has been updated and loaded, and now you can just simply Google search. Those morgues are unnecessary. But the idea there is even back in the day, one would, when they were doing a story, they would research, they would read every story that had ever been written. Every time that person's name had appeared in print as a reporter before you went out and interviewed them, it would be a wise thing to read it, because you might go out to do a story about some athlete, and you might find out that they used to be a softball player, or they used to be a hockey player, or they used to be really big in chess, or they used to be really big, well, that's a perfectly good question if you're going to do a profile on them. In today's day and age, you can do that, but I would also suggest, if you're doing a story, even for this class, and you're going to talk to a person, you're going to do a profile on somebody, you're going to do a story about a club or an organization, Google it. Google the main members. Look at their Facebook pages. Be the best internet stalker you can be, because that will give you reasons to ask them questions. Okay, that will give you a source, and that will help you put together questions, put together things that are interesting, and get the story. Okay, so one of the things before you do any story is don't just go out and go, I want to do a story about dogs. I'm just going to call some people and ask them questions about dogs. Write the questions, research the people you're talking to, ask people who know them questions to get questions, read everything you can possibly read, find out everything you possibly can. If you're going out, like sometimes you'll go out and you'll just go to an event, and like, for example, you go to an event and you just kind of get there. I mean, I did a lot of this where you go out to an event and be like, there's a festival on Tuesday in Petersburg. Okay, go do it, Tim. And you get out there and you have to be like, so tell me about the festival. What's new this year? What's going on? And you kind of have to feel your way through it. But if you go out, sometimes, like if you go out beforehand and you go, okay, what's new this year? What's going on? Maybe you call one of the founders, maybe you go call, and you find out, oh, actually, we have this really cool person coming, or we have this really interesting, or so and so's cousin's coming back. They've been here every year for 20 years, or so and so's been doing this, or you go and do that. Like one example of this is like one year I went out to do a story. This is about 12 or 13 years ago. I went out to do a story about the Black Eyed Peas. I was going to the concert. They said, oh, do a story about the Black Eyed Peas. They're in town. I said, okay. So I go out. And I was like, I don't have any idea. So what I did was I Googled Black Eyed Peas. What's going on with them? Well, they had that song, Let's Get It Started. Let's get it started in here. Do, do, do. That song. Well, the song lyrics are actually, let's get retarded in here. And so there's that, let's get retarded. And so the NBA had taken that at that point as their theme song for their playoffs and for their basketball season. And so that was a big song, but it was always let's get it started. And so I thought, well, that's interesting that they changed the lyrics. I wonder what the fans think. And so when I went out, that's how I wrote the story. As I wrote it, I went out and I asked the fans. I didn't go out and ask, why do you like why do you like Fergie and Apple D? I went out and I said, so you like that song? Yeah. What do you think about which way you want them to sing it tonight? Do you want them to sing it, let's get it started in here, let's get retarded in here? And they'd be like, I want to let's get retarded. That's the way it's supposed to be. I said, well, do you think that's politically incorrect? And they're like, yeah, but that's the song, and they would give good quotes, right? But by doing that research, you're able to get a better story. You're able to approach it in a better way. You're able to ask questions that are more direct. You're able to get a better story. And that's ultimately what you want to do. Instead, if I had gone out and not done that beforehand, I would have gone out and done a story in which I would have been like, fans were all excited. I can't believe that Apple D is in Peoria, which is where it was at. This is really cool. This is like the funnest thing I've ever done, right? And that would have been the story. It would have been the most lame, boring story ever, right? But by doing that research, by getting an angle, by finding something that the fans would connect with, I went from just having a story about something that was of no use to actually having a story about something. And that's what your goal is. I mean, otherwise, you're just filling space. And I mean, if that's what you want to do is just fill space, I don't know what to tell you. That's sad. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just fill a chair here at work. That's what I do. Hopefully you want to make an impact, make a difference, and have people actually care about what you do.